The morning of Wednesday, June 24th, 1896, David Rose, his wife Rebecca, and their son Walter woke up at their home in the Pleasant Valley community of Richland County, Ohio. They had breakfast and planned to set about on a typical day in the small farming community. Little did they know, though, that they would all soon be dead. From the South Shore of Lake Erie, this is Great Lakes True Crime. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that we've received some really great 5-star reviews recently, and they've not gone unnoticed. Thank you to those of you who have left positive reviews. They really help get the word out about our show, and it's great to know that people are listening. David Rose was born in 1829 in Highland County, Ohio. Highland is a sparsely populated county located in southwest Ohio, named for its relatively hilly topography. The county seat, in fact, is called Hillsboro. Highland County is southwest of Columbus and east of Cincinnati. It's an area that I lived in many years ago while working at an outdoor education center, and I can attest to the fact that it is rural and doesn't have too much going on, but perhaps it was a busier place in 1829. A robust man, David grew up working alongside his father in the mills of Highland County. In the spring of 1855, at approximately 26 years of age, he married Rebecca Easter, and the couple had 3 children, Julia, Walter, and Celia, who went by Ceely. By 1880, after David fought in the Civil War, the family, aside from Julia, moved north to Richland County, which lies approximately midway between Cleveland and Columbus. While Highland County was named because it's hilly, Richland County was named for the fertile soil in the area. Apparently, Ohio's counties were not named by the most creative folks. David was a quiet man, studious and well-respected. He was also quite industrious, fixing up an old grist mill owned by the Schrack family and returning it to its full potential. Historically, most farming communities would have at least one grist mill where the farmers could take their corn or grains to be ground into flour. The mills were generally powered by running water in a stream or river. The mill owner usually wouldn't be paid in cash by the farmers for providing this service, but would instead keep a portion of the grain. This was known as the miller's toll. So David got his milling business up and running in the Pleasant Valley region of Richland County, not far from the city of Mansfield. By this time, farmers were starting to buy gasoline-powered engines to grind their own grains, so the milling business was declining, and David made a meager living. David's wife, Rebecca, was born in 1834, also in Highland County. Aside from raising 3 children, Rebecca spent her time spinning and weaving garments that she would then sell to neighbors and in markets. Like David, Rebecca was considered to be very intelligent, but was more forceful in her ways than David. Walter Rose, their only son, was born in 1856 and was not very well educated. He was tall and not exceptionally bright, described as dim-witted by some, but was a hard worker, taking part in many odd jobs over the years. He would hitch up a wagon, for example, and deliver products to stores in neighboring towns. Other times, he would run errands for people and deliver groceries, making whatever money he could along the way. Ceely Rose was born in 1873 in Pike County, Ohio, where the family lived when David was enlisted in the Ohio Volunteer Infantry. When the family moved to Richland County, Ceely was 7 years old. There, she attended Sandstone School, but with little success. Ceely stuttered when she spoke and had a learning disability. She could read, write, and perform basic arithmetic, but did so at a level much below her classmates. Celia was tall, with string blonde hair, usually tied back in a knot. She loved to read fairy tales and children's stories. She had a play area set up in a shed and loved to play party with little dishes and other toys. Rebecca, the mother, treated Celia with great affection and tenderness, but classmates and others were quite cruel to her because of her learning disability. As Celia grew older, some people in the community referred to her as half woman, half child. An early dawn fog had descended upon Pleasant Valley on the warm summer morning of June 24, 1896. David and Walter took their places at the rickety oak kitchen table. Celia helped Rebecca with preparing breakfast and placed full plates on the table. The smell of boiled coffee beans permeated the house. Breakfast this day consisted of eggs, bread and butter, and schmearcase, which today we know as cottage cheese. It was a typical start to a day in the Rose household. After breakfast, David grabbed his white Miller cap from the rack and declared, "I'm off to my grinding." He exited out the back door of the small white house. As usual, David would spend his day filling orders for the neighbors in the old Schrack family mill. As he went out the back door and crossed the footbridge behind the house, Walter headed towards the front door. Sometimes Walter would help his dad with the daily grinding. Other time, he would engage in his odd jobs. On this particular day, he grabbed an empty gallon pail and headed out to pick ripe black raspberries that were rumored to be still abundant in the meadows and fields above the valley. Meanwhile, Rebecca finished her second cup of coffee. Celia finished cleaning up the kitchen after breakfast and prepared for the day's work around the house. Rebecca sat at her loom making a rug for an anxious customer when she suddenly became violently ill. She quickly sent Celia to call for David, who would quickly head up nearby Ferguson Road to obtain help from a doctor. He went to Dr. McCombs' office in nearby Newville and explained that Rebecca had taken ill. The two quickly set out on foot for the Rose house when David became overcome by thirst and was too weak to continue. David stopped to rest and drink some water at the Ferguson's house on Ferguson Road. His condition deteriorated, so he continued the journey to his home by wagon. David eventually made it home, and there Dr. McCombs tended to both the husband and the wife. After that, the doctor set out to find Walter to inform him of what was happening. He eventually found Walter, who was lying alongside the road, too ill to move. During all this commotion, Celia discarded the leftover schmearcase from breakfast in the weeds right behind the house. A few days later, neighbor George Berry would find several dead chickens scattered throughout the fenced-in yard. On Tuesday, June 30th, 1896, David had been gravely ill for 6 days. Dr. Budd of Perrysville had taken over care of the sick family members, prescribing a treatment of tincture of iron every 3 hours and various pain remedies of the time. Nothing had helped, and it was clear that David was in his last throes. Friends and neighbors came by that day to pay their last respects and help in whatever way they could, be it providing a cold cloth on the head or fetching some cold water from the spring. By nightfall, David had taken his last breath. His death would ultimately be ruled a homicide. It had been rumored that Celia had fallen ill in addition to David, Rebecca, and Walter. When coroner George Bauman arrived in Pleasant Valley, he learned that Celia had in fact not taken ill. That had been an untrue rumor spread throughout Pleasant Valley. The coroner also discovered that Celia had been infatuated with that next-door neighbor, Guy Berry. She had dreamed up a fantasy that she and Guy were going to be married and was so obsessed with him that she would constantly interrupt Guy as he tried to do his chores. Finally, Guy's father George decided to talk with David about Celia's obsession, and David vowed to put an end to it. David began scolding Celia about her obsessive behavior, to which Celia replied, "You will not live forever." When Coroner Bauman learned about this response, he became very suspicious about Ceely. It was also revealed around this time that a few weeks earlier, Walter had purchased an arsenic-based poison from Barton's drugstore called Rough on Rats. After the autopsy was complete, the body was prepared and a funeral service was held in the Rose home, followed by a procession that went past the Berry home and ended at the Pleasant Valley Church Cemetery. Rebecca and Walter were both too ill to participate in the funeral procession, although Rebecca was able to don her black mourning dress for the occasion. A few days later, there would be another funeral. The physicians involved with treating the Roses believed the family had been poisoned with arsenic. Word of this got around and rumors filled the entire valley. Neighbors wanted to know what happened, who did it, and why. As part of the autopsy, David's stomach was removed, packed in a glass jar, and sent to Columbus to have it checked for arsenic. By Saturday, July 4th, Rebecca was beginning to show some signs of recovering from her illness. Walter, on the other hand, was still very ill. He was bedridden in the back parlor room and took a turn for the worse that day. By nightfall, he had died. Coroner Bauman was summoned to return to Pleasant Valley from his home in Mansfield. The coroner arrived the next morning and began an inquest into Walter's death. The attention had to quickly turn, however, from the inquest to the autopsy of Walter, as the body was rapidly deteriorating in the hot and humid July weather of mid-Ohio. Walter's stomach and other internal organs were also removed and sent to Columbus for examination. The following Sunday, another funeral procession passed the Berry home and the Little Brick School en route to its destination at Pleasant Valley Church. On Tuesday, July 7th, Prosecutor Augustus Douglas arrived from Mansfield to look into the suspicious deaths of Walter and David. He questioned 8 close friends and neighbors about the events, in addition to questioning Rebecca and Ceely, with Ceely's interrogation being very lengthy and intense. It was learned here that Ceely had prepared the breakfast that morning but did not eat any. Prosecutor Douglas suspected that Ceely laced the coffee with arsenic. When asked who made the coffee, she said her mother had made it, but when tripped up, she stated that she had made it. It became apparent that she had been coached as to how to answer the prosecutor's questions. As a result of the questioning, the residents of Pleasant Valley began to look at Ceely as the prime suspect. Even Rebecca started to be suspicious of Ceely. 11 days later, on July 18th, the investigation of David's stomach was completed. There was now no question that he had died of arsenic poisoning. That same day, Dr. Budd sat down with Rebecca to discuss her condition, which had greatly improved by this time. It seems that she had survived the affliction that had taken David and Walter. The next day, July 19th, Rebecca sent Ceely to the spring house to bring back some bread and milk for breakfast. Ceely did so and prepared the mid-morning meal. Rebecca ate what she could and placed the remainder of the food into the cupboard so she could finish it later in the day. Following an afternoon nap, Rebecca asked Ceely to bring her the remainder of the meal. While eating it, Mrs. Rose remarked to Ceely that it tasted rather sweet. Little did she know that Ceely had sprinkled a half teaspoon of the Rough on Rats concoction into this food. An hour later, Rebecca fell to the floor, contorting her body in pain and vomiting over and over. Rather than trying to help, Ceely stood over her mother, laughing at the awful things she had done. Rebecca's last words were, "Celia, if you have done this, God help you." Moments later, she was dead. Celia then washed out the pepper box where she had hidden the Rough on Rats and placed the poison under a dock leaf in the heavily weeded yard outside the house. The next morning, the coroner was again notified of another death in Pleasant Valley. An autopsy was performed in which Rebecca's stomach, liver, and kidneys were removed for investigation. On July 21st, Rebecca was interred beside her husband at the Pleasant Valley Church graveyard. The 3 deaths had become sensationalized by this point, and Rebecca's funeral drew a huge crowd, not only of friends and neighbors, but also many curiosity seekers and chronic funeral goers. Prosecutor Douglas planned to bring the matter before a grand jury. However, without strong evidence or a confession by Ceely, it seemed to be a difficult case to prosecute. The Pleasant Valley area residents demanded that justice be served, with many believing that Ceely was guilty of the 3 murders. The valley descended into a proverbial battlefield of opposing opinions, accusers, defenders, and doubters. As Ceely was now orphaned, she went to live with the Davis family in nearby Newville. The Davises were family friends of the Roses, and while staying there, Ceely became reacquainted with Tracy Davis, a childhood classmate. They became exceptionally close while Ceely was there, so close, in fact, that Ceely eventually confessed to Tracy that she had, in fact, murdered her 3 family members. It seems that Ceely came up with the idea after she heard her father read a story from the newspaper about someone who had killed a family member with rat poison. Ceely carried out her plan after being scolded that one day by her mother and father over her obsessive infatuation with Guy Berry, the next-door neighbor. Ceely even told Tracy where on the property the pepper box with rat poison in it could be found. What Ceely didn't know, however, was that the plan to have her move in with the Davises and reconnect with Tracy was all part of a plan concocted by Prosecutor Douglas in collaboration with the Davises. After the confession, an arrest warrant was issued for Ceely Rose for the murders of her father, mother, and brother. She was arrested on August 12, 1896. The case continued to be a huge topic of discussion and gossip throughout Richland County. A lengthy trial was held in the autumn of 1896, and it was reported that during the trial, Ceely never showed any signs of remorse. Instead, she seemed to take glory in the murders. Ceely was ultimately found not guilty on grounds of insanity. It was determined that Ceely's mental state was unsound and was caused by, quote, imbecility, unquote. She was not set free, though. Instead, she was committed to the Toledo Asylum in Toledo, Ohio, and later transferred to the State Mental Hospital in Lima. She would live out the remainder of her life at the Lima Hospital, dying of pneumonia on March 14, 1934. Her grave can be found at the Lima State Hospital Cemetery in Lima, Ohio. Of all the episodes of Great Lakes true crime thus far, this story lends itself most to a road trip for those of you that are into that sort of thing. The Rose House still stands today and is located on the grounds of Malabar Farm State Park. You can walk the grounds and see where the Roses took part in their daily activities. You can also look for Ceely's ghost in the windows, as some have reported seeing it there. The house is not regularly open to the public, but it is opened once or twice a year during special events. You can contact Malabar Farm State Park for details on the next public dates. Aside from the Rose House, the state park also houses a working farm where visitors can walk the grounds and see the animals and crops. Tractor rides will take visitors through the farm to learn about conservation practices that have been historically practiced at the farm. Visitors can also tour the Big House, which was the home of author Louis Bromfield, who won the Pulitzer Prize in 1927 for his novel Early Autumn. Bromfield was also one of the earliest proponents of sustainable and organic agriculture in the United States. But the Big House is most famous for hosting the 1945 wedding of Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart, a longtime friend of Bromfield's. Lewis would host many other celebrities at the Big House in the 40s and 50s, including George Burns, Clark Gable, Errol Flynn, and Frank Sinatra. They weren't there to party, though. Brumfield would put them to work practicing sustainable agriculture. Some locals have said they remember James Cagney selling them vegetables at the produce stand just down the road. In any case, Malabar Farm State Park is most definitely worth a visit if you ever find yourself between Columbus and Cleveland, Ohio. Also nearby is the Mansfield Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio. This former state prison is now privately owned and is best known as the prison used in filming the movie Shawshank Redemption. The prison is open to the public for tours and special events. Both the prison and the Ceely Rose house have been the subject of many ghost hunting efforts documented on television and the internet. A quick internet search can provide you with plenty more details on both Malabar Farm State Park and the Mansfield Reformatory. That's it for this episode of Great Lakes True Crime. If you don't follow the show yet, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Great Lakes True Crime. This is your host, writer, and producer, Steve. Thanks for listening, guys.